The games industry is often referred to as an entity that is constantly evolving, or by many accounts, evolving backwards. I'm pretty sure there's a word for that. Anyway, graphical fidelity, complex narratives, and player agency are concepts among many others that are under never-ending scrutiny. A brief look back at the history of games and it's abundantly clear how far the industry has come. It's frankly absurd to think that this and this are only 20 years apart. Visuals aside though, the growth and transformation of how games deliver combat is likely the most impactful change we've encountered, and undeniably one of the most prolific in recent history can be found between 2009 and 2016. You may have already guessed that I'm of course alluding to the industry-leading breakthrough combat system from the Batman Arkham games, known as Free Flow Combat. If you're unfamiliar, I'll summarise it very briefly. Free Flow Combat is an adaptive fighting system that's primary focus is to allow the player to engage with multiple enemies all at once. The system is built upon the idea that as the amount of consecutive attacks and counters increases, so does the enemy's aggression and as a result, the combat intensity. On paper, this doesn't sound like it's much of an evolution over what already existed, especially when you consider that generally the intensity of combat is intrinsically tied to the player's health. To be honest though, a brief overview of the combat doesn't really do it justice, but I have no intention of doing a deep dive into the minutiae of how it works and why it works so well, so you'll just have to take my word for it, only you don't need to take my word for it. The overwhelming success and adoration for the Arkham games should be evidence enough that the games do what they do very, very well. Anyway, love it or loathe it, and I'd wager you love it, Arkham's combat hinges on the use of the triangle button, or the Y button if you're that way inclined. This button serves as the single input necessary to make the Dark Knight himself pull off a quick counter, allowing ample opportunity to unleash a flurry of devastating attacks back towards his would-be assailant. Now, there's something that we've come to expect from the games industry. If a gameplay mechanic proves to be successful, you can be damn sure that mechanic will proliferate in the years to follow. We've seen it with Resident Evil 4 and the over-the-shoulder perspective. We've seen it with Mirror's Edge and the use of first-person parkour. And of course we've seen it with Metal Gear Solid's approach to stealth. Unsurprisingly then, plenty of iterations of Arkham's free-flow combat have been delivered in its wake. Invariably we were treated to visceral sound effects and excellent animations, each finishing move diverse enough to watch 100 times over and for it not to feel repetitive. And that's a good thing too, seeing as the combat was usually positioned as being a key aspect of the game's quote-unquote unique selling points. You'll notice I'm referring to the past tense a lot as I talk about these games that utilise this combat system. Arkham Asylum and Arkham City released in 2009 and 2012 respectively, each time proving that the combat was something that the fans enjoyed, and each time showing investors that something similar would likely do very well in terms of sales revenue. United Front Games were the developers behind Sleeping Dogs, a beloved game from 2012 and one of the first games to adopt and adapt free-flow combat. I know I speak for many when I say that this game was an enormous surprise, in part due to how fun the combat was. Admittedly, it didn't quite have the depth of the Arkham games, but frankly I preferred the animations being easier to discern without Batman's cape getting in the way, as well as the protagonist Wei Shen not leaping a dozen feet across the arena at the touch of a button. Please forgive me, I don't want to throw too much shade at the Capes Crusader, but I never really liked how he would almost prance about when taking down criminals. It's a small complaint and one that never really hurt the experience, I just thought I'd mention it. Maybe you are one of the few that thought the same? Let me know in the comments. A couple of years after Sleeping Dogs and Monolith Productions launched a new IP applying what had been learned from the Arkham combat formula, but instead of applying it to the streets of Hong Kong, they applied it to Middle-earth. 2014's Shadow of Mordor was once again a huge surprise to me and many others alike. I can recall people initially dismissing the game for trying to copy Assassin's Creed. The combat, however, was far more involved than anything Assassin's Creed had previously offered, and it was a fantastic iteration on what was then fast becoming the standard action-adventure combat blueprint. In 2015, Mad Max was released, having been developed by Avalanche Studios, and keeping up with what had almost become a tradition at this stage, it too left me thoroughly shocked at how much fun it was. I picked up Mad Max for about 10 quid, equivalent to about $12 US, only 9 months after the initial release, and I genuinely felt regret for not purchasing it sooner. What left me truly astonished was how not only did they nail the feeling behind the wheel, but also the feeling behind Max's fists. The mighty crunch when Max lands a haymaker is nothing short of glorious, and it leads me to believe that maybe this is why I'm not so fond of Batman's pirouettes. Full disclosure, I only played the Arkham games for the first time in 2021. Each of those aforementioned titles, plus all the others from the Arkham series, have firmly placed themselves among the collection of games I frequent at least once a year. I may only pay them a short visit, perhaps a quick run through the martial arts clubs, maybe taking down a nemesis or two, or just beating the ever-living daylights out of some war boys for the hell of it. But a trend that the games industry can easily fall victim to is stagnation. Sleeping Dogs, Shadow of Mordor and Mad Max all happen to be games I cherish, but their dedication to remaining within the confines of what have proved to be successful positioned them as allegedly lacking originality, and ultimately pushed the once novel approach to combat towards becoming a relic that appears to be avoided by developers. As I mentioned in my video covering the use of the skill tree, the reliance of a successful mechanic can often stifle innovation. I don't think I'd find many who disagree that variety in games is vital. Hopefully the rise and fall of free-flow combat is testimony enough. I mean it with complete sincerity, I miss this combat system. You won't find me standing at the top of a hill proclaiming that it's a superior approach to combat design, but damn it, I found it fun. In an ideal world, the steady growth of free flow would have continued alongside other popular combat designs currently sweeping the industry. Alas, it appears to have become an abandoned formula, shunned by developers making way for the next bandwagon to jump on. I suppose it's just a matter of time before another once revered combat system is used, abused, labelled as generic, and cast aside in preparation for history to repeat itself.